If you want to help Myth Vision Podcast grow, you can join our Patreon. There are different tiers, as well as help out with PayPal. Thank you so much. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment.
Jason Stewart asks, Dr. Robert M. Price, I believe it's probable that Paul joined an already existing movement of Peter and James the Just. It is a possibility that Paul believed in a celestial Christ. What did the earlier Christian leaders, Peter and James the Just, believe? And 2, and were they compatible with the Ebionites or Nazarenes, meaning that they were earlier groups than the Gnostics and even Orthodox? Much love from a religious Christian person.
I've been thinking along these lines a bit just lately because of a thesis I'm going to argue in Judaizing Jesus, which I've decided on a subtitle for that now. It's going to be Building the Ecumenical Golem. And to say that the absolutely Orthodox Jewish Jesus is just a figment of Jewish Christian dialogue and all that. But at any rate, here's the way I see it, grossly oversimplifying it, but probably still hopelessly confusing. I tend to think that Paul was the same as Simon Magus, and that he had been, therefore, one of the disciples of John the Baptist, along with Dositheus the Samaritan, as we read in the Pseudo-Clementines. And they record a dispute between Simon and Dositheus over who's going to be the successor of John the Baptist once he was out of the picture. And Dositheus won somehow, and so Simon split off and did his own thing. I think that is, a la Robert Eisenman, that is the same event talked about more cryptically with cipher language in I guess it's the Habakkuk Pesher, or one of the Dead Sea Scrolls anyway, where it says that the spouter of lies was a member of the Dead Sea Scrolls community, whoever they were, and broke with them over a dispute about the Torah and the admission of outsiders, Gentiles apparently, whom they called the simple ones of Ephraim. And that sounds to me like Paul and the Gentile mission, and what's the dispute? Well, circumcision and so forth. And so he started his own thing there. Let's see. I also think that Eisenman and his predecessor, what's his name? I can never remember it. Maybe it'll come to me later, doesn't matter, I guess. That the Dead Sea Scrolls sect was the early Jerusalem church. And about them, we know a couple of interesting things about their organization. They had a council of 12 leaders, and within that, there were 3 who were the real big shots. Well, to me, that fits the Jerusalem church real well, because the 12 symbolized the 12 tribes of Israel, whether they were still extant or not. I mean, you're gonna adopt the image of the patriarchs. And the 3 would be the 3 so-called pillars mentioned in Galatians. It's interesting to note that nowhere in the Pauline epistles, whoever wrote them, is there any mention of the 12 except in the interpolated list of appearances in 1 Corinthians 15. But you could have had both. And in my reconstruction, Peter or Cephas, James and John were the 3 pillars, and they didn't have a Messiah until let's say if they started out with no Messiah, they didn't need one, because the 3 pillars, the title of which already implies cosmic significance. They're like identified with the pillars of the earth that hold up the firmament and so on. And within that group, you got the sons of Zebedee, the Boanerges, James and John, which seems to be a Greek version of the Sumerian Geshbuanu, or upholders of the vault of heaven. The sons of thunder, I think connotes the sons of the thunderer Zeus. Some Jews already identified Zeus with Jehovah anyway. They're both thundering storm gods and all that. And and they stand, being the twins, they stand for Castor and Pollux, who are the sons of Zeus also. And so they are like, and they seem to stand also for Boaz and Jachin, the two great pillars in the temple of Jerusalem. All temples, but especially the Jerusalem temple, they're like microcosmic models of the universe as they understood it. So if the two of the three pillars were supposed to be Jachin and Boaz, again, they're the axis mundi that connects heaven and earth, which is what goes on in the temple. What was Cephas? He is the rock. Whether he's identified with Peter or not, that's a separate question, though it doesn't really matter for this, Cephas or Peter, because they both mean the rock. And he would correspond to this navel stone in the temple that was believed to be the stopper to prevent a second flood like Noah's, because it said in Genesis that the waters gushed up from the firmament below, from the disk earth below, and rain came through the windows of the solid firmament. And the Jewish legend and thought for a long time said that, the waters would come right back up if anything happened to that navel stone, which was the center of the universe, they figured, the center of the earth. And so there's a great essay on this by, I think it's Anthony Hansen. It's A something Hansen in this particular book. I may have the wrong Hansen, but he explains the connotations of these three titles. And if that's the case, these guys are believed to be central mediators between heaven and earth in their own right, much like the head of the Alawi sect of Islam in Iraq. The Ba'athist Party were Alawists, and their leaders, some of them were called the Qutb. I'm probably mispronouncing that. It's not that. I think it's Q2UB in English somewhere. And that means the pillar. And they're explicitly thought to be the connection between heaven and earth. Well, okay, no need of a Messiah there, and they were the heads of the community. My guess is that and if this is the Jerusalem church, Paul, aka Simon Magus, when he split from them, he began to think in terms of a celestial Christ who had once perhaps visited the earth in his form. He said it was really he himself who was on that cross, seeming to suffer, but not really suffering. And then that's reflected in turn in Mark, where it has Simon from Cyrene bear the cross. And according to, I think it's the Cerinthians, or was it Basilides? I don't know. Early Gnostics said that he was crucified because it says they took him to the place of Golgotha, and there they crucified him. Well, the pronoun should refer to the last proper name. And if that's the case, it's Simon, because that's the last name we hear, not Jesus. That seems far out because it's so alien, but it's an interesting grammatical point. Maybe he was just a sloppy writer, but you got to wonder. And so, all of this to say that the Messiah, some kind of projection of Simon himself, was his thought, the redeemed Redeemer who comes out of the Pleroma to rescue Helena, the incarnate wisdom. Well, suppose the Jerusalem/Qumran community is on hard times, just like we know the Jerusalem church was, because of Paul having to collect tribute from the Gentile churches. In fact, what we read about in Galatians, where they make this deal that Paul goes to Jerusalem and says, here's what I'm about. And they agree to recognize him and give him the right hand of fellowship. And he says, with one proviso, you've got to collect the money for the saints, the Christians of Jerusalem. And he says, all right, no problem. And is it possible that that is really telling us, or is the rest of the story in terms of what would have happened with as often happens with churches and sects, they decided our only chance of survival is to merge with another group. And Simon's one of the gang from way back. He left us, maybe we can reconcile with him and come up with a compromise theology. And okay, we will accept your Christ. So that involved historicizing Jesus. And so Simon wouldn't have cared about that. But the Qumran Christians, who would have been the same basically as the Ebionites, who had Gnostic tendencies themselves, they would need a Jewish Jesus to fit into their theology. And so they came up with a Jesus who was a Jew like them and a law-observant Jew with some changes. And so how did they do it? Well, this is why the gospel stories of Jesus all sound like Old Testament stories rewritten, like Thomas Brodie and many others show. And this is why virtually every non-Christological statement, like the stuff in John, for instance, I am the light, and all that, everything other than that can be paralleled, sometimes verbatim, from rabbinical sources, that there's nothing that original. It's funny, in the reading I'm doing now, it seems to me that the scholars who say, oh yeah, Jesus was a Jew, that is square one. He was an observant, pious Jew. That they say, boy, those people like Bultmann and Norman Perrin with a criterion of dissimilarity, what a mistake. If you say, oh, it sounds Jewish, well, we got to cut it out. Jesus might have said it, but there's no way to know. I mean, it could easily have been borrowed. They can't keep straight in the rabbinic records who said what. The same story or saying will be attributed to 2 or 3 different rabbis. So maybe that's what happened here. But they say those guys are wrong. These people like Charlesworth and so many others, they have what I would call the criterion of similarity. If it sounds Jewish, Jesus must have said it, because Jesus was a Jew. We can take that as read. And so that this is totally irresponsible. The other view is pretty skeptical, but there's reason for that skepticism. You can see, even if you believe there was a historical Jewish Jesus, that he gets more and more Judaized. Just compare Mark and Matthew, for instance. So I think, yes, the earliest Christians of James, John, and Peter, these guys were pretty much the Dead Sea Scrolls group and the Ebionites, and they had no Jesus. And Paul, who did, had this cosmic Christ, and they got together so the Jewish Christians could survive, and reconciled with Paul or Simon, who had been kicked out before. And and this would explain the grace thing, that why the Gentiles don't need to keep the Torah, as in Acts 15, because Paul was telling people you don't need to do that. And this is why they could reconcile and say, okay, we're not telling our Jewish brethren that. We're telling them to keep the Torah and keep circumcising their kids. But okay, you don't have to tell your people. will be two different oxen under the yoke. And so this is the theory I'm going to expound at wearying length in this book. So I think you're on the right track.
Yeah, I think
you can wake up now.
No, I think you got something interesting there, because you've mentioned in the authentic supposed seven, supposed authentic seven, and I think I've also heard Kenneth Humphreys make comment that he thinks that the seven were like the followers of Paul, not really Paul himself, that are kind of, it's like church doctrine and dogma that's going on as time goes by. And because this is interesting, if they merge, it's oil and water, so to speak, okay, it would make sense then why Paul, or who, in the name of Paul, are fighting Cephas or James or these types of other Christians who are trying to circumcise or Judaize his group. Why, if they're two separate, complete groups, would they be doing that? And I know that everyone tries to explain with different theories. Paul, the Pagan's Apostle by Paula Fredrickson, she's trying to say, that Paul's letters are all written to pagans. But you have to scratch your head and go, why all the Jewish stuff then? Where is Paul writing these letters to? Is there like a separate, singled out group of pagans that are he knows where to write, or is he writing to synagogues that might have the groups combined, blended together?
Well, we know that's how Romans presents it. He spends a lot of time saying, he says, now I speak to those who know the law. And he's going back and forth. You Gentiles, don't start looking down your nose at the Jews. Well, they failed, they're out, and not permanently. Don't say that. Eventually, we'll be one big happy family. And he says, let the one who abstains from meat in dedication to God, let him do it. The one who rejoices in freedom from the law by eating a hamburger, let him do it. It's not for you to judge. And so obviously he does, or whoever wrote it, has a pluralistic congregation. And though the scripture references, God-fearers might know those, because their whole thing was they attended synagogue where they would hear scripture read. I don't think they did anything else really in Judaism, because not being full proselytes, there was a lot they couldn't do. You could go into the temple, but that was the court of the Gentiles. It said, don't go further, you're going to get executed. So they could hear and see what was going on, but not participate. Well, Paul's God-fearers were probably knew a lot of stuff, though I still hold that this idea that Paul is preaching to Gentiles the good news of the Jewish Messiah makes no sense. I mean, what would they care about that? Oh boy, the new Prince of Monaco has come. What the heck do you care? If you're not from Monaco, you don't even know the guy's name. And I think it's the same way here.